Our second workshop will be presented by Heather Gorr and Grace Woolson. Heather has a PhD in material science and engineering from the University of Pittsburgh and a master's and bachelor's of science in physics from Penn State University. And she's currently a senior product marketing manager for MATLAB, she leads technical marketing content in data science, AI, deployment, and advanced MATLAB and Python programming. And Grace is the student competitions technical evangelist at Mathworks. And she provides technical resources to students who participate in data science competitions, and she creates tutorials on how to use MATLAB for data science workflows. And she has been involved with the WIDS Datathon. She provided the MATLAB tutorial for competitors there. So Heather and Grace will present the workshop using MATLAB and Python together. So please welcome Heather and Grace.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And thank you all for joining us today for our workshop on using MATLAB and Python together. My name is Grace Woolson. If you participated in the WIDS Datathon, maybe you've seen me. And if you're participating next year, maybe you'll see me around. And I actually did a live stream with Heather for that as well. Heather, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think Julia did a great job of introducing us, so there's not too much left. But one thing I wanted to focus on is, we both work in the data science space and both use MATLAB, Python, plethora of other languages and packages. So that's really the objective of the workshop today, is to really get a sense of what you need to think about whenever you're trying to combine these different languages together. So both of us are, very familiar with both languages and many others. So we're very happy to answer any questions that you have. Please, feel free to ask us anything at all in the chat.
We're also joined by two fantastic TAs today. We have Connell and Louver. That'll be answering questions in the chat. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I could go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Connell D'Souza. I also work on the student programs team here at the Mathworks, and I've been supporting various competitions in data science for quite a few years now. So I'm happy to be here and hopefully answer any questions that you all have in the chat.
Hello, my name is Louver Walker-Hannon. I'm happy to be a TA for this workshop, and I assist customers in AI and data science related problems related to being in the application engineering group. And I will be behind the scenes with Connell to help answer any questions. And I'm also a member of the WIDS workshop committee. So looking forward to this workshop, and take it away. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. We are going to kick off today's workshop with a poll. What programming languages do you use? Feel free to discuss in chat once you've answered. Let's see, for me, most of my experience was in Python, but I added MATLAB to my repertoire 2 years ago.
Nice.
What about you, Heather?
I made this list, and so you might assume that I know all of these in some capacity. But of course, these days I tend to use MATLAB and Python the most. And of course, well, given the world that I work in, I tend to help a lot of people deploy and integrate AI into actual systems. Of course, with MATLAB users, people are trying to use these things on cars and airplanes and whatnot. So we need to get the code onto a device, C++ or CUDA. So I'll dabble, let's put it that way. But of course, MATLAB and Python are my go-to.
There was a time where I would have said I use C++, but it has been a hot minute. And it looks like we got a lot of Python users. So yep. You're in
Python,
the right place.
Yep, Python and R. Sounds just like data science, right? Perfect. And so I think that's great too, because it's really one of those things where the skills are so transferable, especially between the three of them. Those three languages are so high level and really intuitive to get started with. So I think we're all going to be in good shape for this workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Python's an open source language. You saw some other open source languages on that list. So I just want to take a moment to mention that Mathworks actually is also pretty into open source. We've got lots of projects on GitHub, and Mathworks actually has their own open source platform called MATLAB Central. So I've included some of our popular open source links on this slide. We'll be sharing the whole slideshow with you guys after the workshop. So feel free to contribute.
Yeah, it's excellent. I love talking open source, especially in these kinds of conference workshops. We're very supportive of the community.
Absolutely. All right, so for today's workshop, we're going to go over an entire workflow from accessing data to co-execution to deployment. But the main focus of our workshop is going to be on this co-execution part in the middle. And that's broken up into two parts. So first, we're going to talk about calling Python from MATLAB, and that's going to be the hands-on portion of the workshop. We've got a MATLAB online environment set up for you guys. We'll get you into it shortly, so it'll be easy for us to go through it together. And then we're going to move to calling MATLAB from Python, since maybe not all of you have Python installed and we all might have different Python environments. That part's not going to be hands-on, but Heather will show us an example of what it looks like to call MATLAB from Python. Cool. And we're going to start with some data access. You can't have data science without data. And for any data science workflow, you're going to have to get your data from somewhere. And even when you're using two languages together, you're going to have to figure out a way to access the data from both of those languages. For our workshop today, we will be accessing data from a web service called Open Weather Map that has weather data, surprise. And we're going to use the data available on this service to predict air quality in a specific region. I just wanted to introduce that idea to you guys right now, but we'll get into the code for this when we get into our exercise.
I think it's also important just because, we work with a lot of, people that are doing this in real life, and sometimes you don't necessarily need to combine the languages together. If a whole group is trying to just access the results or access the database or something, it's always a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so now into co-execution. So co-execution is using two languages in tandem. And I just wanted to note that while we'll be talking about MATLAB and Python today, MATLAB has integration with multiple other languages. And on top of the ones you see here, we also have an integration with Fortran. So whether you tend to use a lot of different languages in your day-to-day, or there's specific external libraries that you want to take advantage of, a lot of the processes we talk about today and we go through will help you get started even with these other languages. Okay, so for our workshop today, as I've mentioned, we have this weather data on a web service. And let's say that we have some code, Python code, that already accesses this data. We could write MATLAB code that does the same thing, because let's say we want to work with our data in MATLAB. Let's say maybe we're MATLAB users. We could write MATLAB code that accesses the data, but that would be a waste of time. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use MATLAB to call Python, and then bring the data from Python back into MATLAB. And from there, we can use the data however we want. All right, so why might you want to call Python from MATLAB? Feel free to put your thoughts in chat if you have any. But kind of like we just said, let's say we're already working in MATLAB, but we want to reuse existing Python code. Or maybe you want some functionality that's only available in Python.
And these are great points. I think also we heard some great questions about visualization platforms and like what are great, good ways to explore your data. And that's one of the big reasons that people will use MATLAB, just kind of very intuitive visualizations and, data cleaning and things like that. And then of course, most people here actually are already using Python. So of course you want to take advantage of that work. Yeah, this is great.
No use in reinventing the wheel. Okay, are you ready? We're going to get you guys set up. So I'm going to go through these instructions. We'll keep them up while you guys get set up. And then Louver is going to share these links in the chat so you guys can spend some time getting into the code. So first, you're going to click this first link. If you don't already have a MATLAB license, it will give you a temporary one for the workshop. And you'll just need to sign into your Mathworks account, which you should have made before the workshop. And then once you are signed in, you can access the files by clicking on this second link here. You'll want to click add to my files and then copy folder so that you have a copy of the files in your MATLAB drive. And then once you've done that, it's as simple as opening MATLAB online and navigating to the folder. So I will leave this slide up. Feel free to ping in chat if you have any troubles, and please raise your hand when you have done it so we know when to move on.
Awesome. And you'll have access to this for quite a while. So, even if you don't make it through everything today, or you want to really absorb up some of this later, it's yours now.
Yeah, and Heather, I can't see the chat very well because I'm sharing my screen. So let me know when you think
Yeah, so far so good. Yeah, let us know if you have succeeded or not. Also, just let us know. Tends to take a minute just to kind of get everything organized.
Got my warm cup of tea. I know we've got people in different time zones, but it's a fantastic fall chili in the Northeast.
Ah, I'm in California right now in a hotel room. In fact, I'm visiting MATLAB users who are trying to integrate MATLAB and Python. So it's a big theme for my week this week. One question was about sharing the presentation. Definitely we'll share everything afterwards, and links, and this will exist on YouTube forevermore. So definitely you can access all of this later.
And we'll share out the slide or the WIDS organization will share out the slide deck in an email a few days after the workshops.
Excellent. All right. So one thing I really love MATLAB Online now because of these kinds of workshops, you don't have to, you just need your login and links, so it's really easy to share things and collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of MATLAB Drive. Made these things a lot easier.
All right, so far we have an error. So hopefully our TAs can maybe help out with that one. And again, let us know if you're experiencing any challenges. We can definitely help out. Yeah, let us know. That's what it's all about. Yeah, I don't want to keep talking and distract people while they're trying to focus on getting set up. So trying not to be too distracting.
We'll have to have theme music next time. And thank you, Hubert, for sharing those links in the chat.
This is good because it's also reminiscent of whenever you are trying to combine multiple languages together. Oftentimes you spend a lot of time on the setup at first. So in this case, it's logging in, but still can be a challenge, just, getting set up to begin with. So I think it's fair. Another thing, just to emphasize, you really want to make sure you copy the folder in the MATLAB Drive or in the MATLAB Drive window. That way you'll have access to it later. So just want to mention that.
Yeah, and that way you can make your own modifications too.
Right, exactly.
We'll give it another minute.
Yeah, I was thinking if anybody has success or not, let us know. If I was at home, I could be playing guitar right now. Have nice chill music for setup. I think so. Should I start sharing? We have a couple of success stories in the chat.
Okay, awesome.
Perhaps we can get going. At least I can also get myself set up and start sharing.
Yeah, okay. So the links are still in the chat. So feel free to, if you need to keep setting up, feel free to put questions in the chat. But in the interest of time, Heather, do you want to start us on our exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm extremely awkward, by the way. I have one screen. I'm used to like my Gamer Pro setup at home with all my things that I need. So yeah, like she mentioned, you can keep, everything's in the chat, so you'll be able to access all of that if you're still, getting logged in. So you'll eventually, whenever you go to copy folder, you should have this. Oh geez, I have lots of things in here. Also, I'm going to change my layout. And
Python workshop.
Python workshop. Jeez. All right, there we go. And so you should have something like this. And again, you'll have access to all of this afterwards. There's, MATLAB code, Python code showing both of the directions. So you can try that out. And we're going to start with the script call Python from MATLAB. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. All right, and once again, let us know. I'll pause here for a moment, just make sure everybody's following along. It's a little, I've actually been giving some workshops this week at the UC system of schools, and it's so wonderful to actually see people's faces, although sometimes they're like, why? Like, what is happening? But it's really nice because then I know if people are being successful or not. So please definitely let us know in the chat. All right, and maybe Grace, I also am not looking at the chat. So do you want to lead me in the right direction? Should I carry on here, or?
Yeah, we don't have any questions.
All right.
Looks like we're good so far.
Very good. All right, so again, everything that we're showing here and like the things that we're going to be really emphasizing are very similar for integrating any language. Again, we saw lots of people using lots of different languages, and it's a great way to think about how these workflows and processes kind of go. So first things first, we actually need to make sure the two languages can talk to one another. So in this case, we have it set up for you to make sure we're pointing to the right interpreter from MATLAB. Oftentimes with me, I have many Python versions on my system, including 2.7. People still use it, I know. But so this is a good way also, it should detect it automatically, but this is a good way to make sure you're using the version that you really want. So if you're using this outside of MATLAB Online, this part would be a little different. So it worked. We can talk to it. So you can see it's pointing to the right direction, and we get some information about the interpreter, and now we should be good to go.
Awesome.
Also, I wanted to mention, since we didn't have a ton of MATLAB users in the poll, this is a live editor script, really similar to what you would see with notebooks, all sorts of things like that. But I've been using shortcuts to run section by section, but you can also use run section and these sort of play buttons and very intuitive things to navigate through. So now we want to actually make use of this. And so where we would typically call, import math and then math.square root. If we're trying to do this from MATLAB, you just stick pi in front of it. No big deal. So let's go ahead and give it a try.
Fantastic.
Yay, it worked. 42, there's a reason I always choose it. Bonus points if you know why in the chat. All right, so success, hurrah. One of the things that we like to talk about first is that you can always, data conversion and data structures, that's one of the biggest things you really need to think about whenever you're integrating like this. So it's very intuitive. You can just create, list, dictionaries, NumPy arrays, whatever you need to pass back and forth, you can just create that directly. So pretty straightforward.
Heather, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I noticed on line 5 for the list, you use the square brackets, but in the list example above, you use curly brackets. What is the difference?
Good question. So this is creating, actually, since many people are familiar with Python and not MATLAB, there's a lot of bracket things to think about. But the curly brackets will create more like dictionary, the heterogeneous kinds of data. And then, in this case, it was just 2 numeric values. So a little bit, you have some options either way, I guess. And we're going to be sharing all of this information, but the MATLAB documentation has quite a lot of great information about this exact challenge or, things to think about whenever you're, creating these data structures, working with them. Awesome. All right, so one of the other things we need to think about is the syntax differences. So, of course, every language has different syntax. That's life. And, of course, in MATLAB now, you can use name equal value syntax to pass in arguments. And one thing I like to point out here, you don't have to follow along if you don't want this error, but this is really one of the biggest challenges. I know I really should have acted much better. Oh, I'm in California. I'm in Hollywood. I should be good at this. Oh my goodness, what happened?
What?
Oh no. But I love this for many reasons. Because you immediately see, of course we get errors. This is life. This is why we're taking workshops and learning all the time, right? And so you can immediately see that it's a Python error. It's not a MATLAB error. It actually throws both errors. So you can always see either direction. And you can see right away it's a type error. And so that's one of the biggest things, that's why I'll just go back. And whenever we convert it to an integer, we're good to go. So it's just one thing to really think about the defaults, right? So if you just type 2 in Python, that's an integer. If you type 2 in MATLAB, that's a float or a double. So just something to think about whenever we're going back and forth. And again, this is very common whenever you're integrating. That's why I put this little hint. All right. So we'll pause for a moment, and maybe since we have lots of good Python users here, try calling your favorite Python function and see what happens. I like this one, of course, because I like to read the Zen of Python in MATLAB. It makes me happy. So yeah, try it out, share what you came up with in the chat, and yeah, it'll be great.
I want to know what some of your favorite Python functions are.
I know. I have some favorites, but they're pretty complicated. I really like scikit-learn, and I just can't really write that in one line right now. But Zen of Python works for me. What about you? Do you have a favorite, Grace?
I had an answer to this last week, so now it's going to bother me if I can't remember it.
I could talk all day about my favorite MATLAB functions, but also pretty complicated. SVD is my favorite. Do we have any clever code in the chat? Hopefully, I don't know. It's really.
Anyone feel like sharing?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Also, at any point during the exercise, feel free to let us know if you're having any issues or any questions.
All right. Well, hopefully we're getting the hang of things. Also, this shows some of the other ways that you could import, your code, and so it's a nice example. But yeah, please share. It'd be great to see what you came up with. So at this point, we want to get back to our weather example. We've talked about that a bit, trying to, integrate this code that we'd already written or that somebody else had already written. And with MATLAB, there are a couple of different ways that you can call this depending on how you have things organized. So maybe you just have a couple of lines of code that you want to copy paste. You can use pyrun. If you have a script or some statements in a file, you can use pyrun file. So that's what we're going to try first. So I have this kind of, I'll call it silly because I can, but I wanted it to be very straightforward and intuitive just to kind of get a sense of how this works. So it's displaying a random number claiming to be the temperature for whatever location you type in. So pretty straightforward, just create some functions and calls them. So we want to be able to use this. So let's go ahead and use pyrun file. Again, since that's a file itself, we can just run that and opens the interpreter and does its thing.
Oh man, I hope that's intelligent.
Again, this is, I really should have changed the random numbers. The last time we ran it yesterday, it was 1. I was like, all right, it's not that bad yet, okay?
Not yet, I'm not ready.
It's chilly, it's pumpkin spice time, but it's not quite 19. So of course, if we look, we actually might want to use this, in reality, we want to continue to do some calculations or whatever we want to do, we can get an output from it. So if we just run that next section, you can see, if we want to capture that temperature, again, it's just getting worse and worse by
colder.
the moment. That's what I get for random numbers. But it's nice because then you can capture the output and now you'll be able to work with it in MATLAB. So we have it in our workspace. So it's a good time to take a moment. Maybe you could make the script better and do something more interesting than a random number. But go ahead and take a moment to work with the weather script and adjust it however you like for a different city and call it yourself.
Yeah, and to open a file, you can just double click on it in that current folder tab.
Exactly. Thank you.
What are some good cities we want to make cold?
Poor California. We'll do that. All right. I'm in LA. All right. Yeah, good stuff.
So I have a question in chat about sharing the files. Luver, would you be able to reshare the file link? So there's a link that you can click on that will show you all of the files. Con will share the link. Thank you. And you can just click on the add to folder and then copy.
Thank you very much. And this is good because again, you'll be able to access this for, a good portion of time, a few more weeks. So, anytime you want to access it, you go through that same process.
Awesome.
All right. So, of course, in this case, it's my silly script. It does silly things, so it's not very intuitive. It's not very exciting. But in reality, I actually had made this module that does all the stuff with the weather data that we were talking about. And so if you want to take a look, again, I'll just kind of open this quickly to browse. There's my weather.py. And it is a module that has a couple of functions, getting the current weather information from the API and then parsing it. So it's coming back as a dictionary, parses and gets some of the information out. Excuse me. So just like we saw with the math library and others kind of simple, we just call pi dot the name of the module dot the name of the function. In this case, you actually could get your own access key if you like, but we're using the sample one for London.
We get all this information.
Yeah, all kinds of info. And the good news is that it worked and I didn't get an error. But you can see, it's again in a dictionary, there's tons and tons of info here. And so this is kind of where a lot of the decision-making happens now. So we've got this data in MATLAB. What do we want to do with it now? And so if we look at it, it's a dictionary still. It's still a Python dictionary. I'm going to just use the workspace quickly. So hopefully I'm not making you dizzy by clicking around too many times. But you can see, it's not, at this point, it's a MATLAB, it's in the MATLAB workspace, but it's still behaving as a dictionary. So one thing I kind of like to do is just, it's a little bit of a cheat, but if you do methods, it'll show you all the things or many of the things that you can do with it. So of course there's dictionary things like popping and, values and things like that. But this also gives you a hint of what data types you might want to convert it to in MATLAB. So that's, again, one of those things that you kind of, okay, I have this, now what? So we can continue, in this case, actually, we'll continue to work with it as a dictionary, since we have this other function that does the parsing. So we can just pass it right into the next function, exactly the same kind of syntax we saw. And now we have less information, or, good information, but, we're parsing through getting what we want.
Heather, I'm going to jump in real quick. Please ignore the link I sent. Sorry about that. We had a question about an error saying unable to resolve the name. If you are not in the Python workshop folder, so if at the top navigation bar, it says MATLAB Drive and not MATLAB Drive/Python workshop, make sure you click into the Python workshop folder, because that'll give you access to you'll know where to look for the script. I tried to copy paste an answer to that question and I didn't copy it. So apologies for the link in the chat.
All right, thank you. I was like, oh no, did we suddenly break the Python install on MATLAB Online? That would be bad. But yeah, that's a common error, just the current folder. All right, cool. So again, this is kind of the time that you want to think and, what do we actually want from this data? What's our next step? So we could actually just get the data out of it. Maybe we only just want the temperature. And, that's fairly easy to do. You just index and extract it right out. So again, this is kind of that bracket dilemma. Again, always different syntax differences. I never know what bracket I'm using. And, I'm always trying square brackets and curly brackets in the wrong language. But in MATLAB, we think of curly for content. So it basically, whenever you're indexing, it brings out the data in whatever form it's in as is. So that's why I think, just a little hint, curly for content. And of course, we'll subtract, I think so. And of course, we'll subtract, Calvin. Actually, this is a wonderful demo. It's actually running still. There's a web interface that we use. And it's always saying that the weather or the air quality is very hazardous because it thinks the world is on fire because I haven't updated it to Calvin or from Calvin. So, all right. So now that we've gotten the hang of it, we want to, we're working with scalars, but of course it's MATLAB, Matrix Laboratory. A lot of the reason that people use it is because of arrays. So our next step is going to be doing that same process, but getting the forecast data. So that we can work with, more data, of course, more like we're used to in our work with, X data, Y data, tabular kinds of data. So go ahead and work on this exercise 2.2 and bring in the forecast for the next 10 days. Are there any questions or anything that we should talk about?
So far, we're good in chat.
All right. And this is one I know we've talked about this, Grace, but as a former professor, I was always kind of easy for some certain things. I don't want to upset people. Actually, I won't say that. I was actually kind of mean sometimes because I was teaching, C++ and MATLAB and things like that. But I like people to be successful. So if you can literally just copy and paste this, it's okay. As a hint.
So it does the 10 days automatically?
Yes. Yep. So yeah, again, I'm just too easy now, but I like when people are successful and happy. So we'll go ahead and copy pasta. All right, now we got some data. So now we have this array and we'll be able to look at the forecast and actually use our MATLAB goods to do some additional forecasting. So, just like we talked about, again, this is really one of the biggest challenges whenever we're integrating languages, always, no matter what language it is, it's how we are representing the data in either or. So there are some great resources. Again, there's links here. We'll share all sorts of goodies, but there's a nice, list of sort of the defaults, the side-by-side mapping of what data will work for, your needs. And again, you can always use methods and just see quickly what you might want to convert it to. So, of course, a dictionary is delightfully heterogeneous data. You could have all different sorts of things in there. And in MATLAB, that's best represented as a struct. So very similar. So we'll go ahead and run this section and do some converting, because now we want to start, getting these things into MATLAB, converting things and making sure MATLAB understands it, and then we can apply our machine learning and forecasting.
So nicely organized too.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, this is actually a great example to point out how the default behavior works. And so I think of it as if MATLAB can tell if it's a float, if it's a floating point data, or something that is easy to understand behind the scenes, it's going to convert it automatically. But something like an integer, we talked about this. This is the default for Python. MATLAB, we're very precise about precision. There's a lot of people who really care about numerics. And so there's a lot of ways to represent integers, right? Signed, unsigned, 32, 8, whatever. So we don't like to, impose some decision on you for integers. So anyway, that's just some rationale. Good to know behind the scenes. But so if something is coming as an integer, it's kind of up to you. But no big deal. We can just directly convert. So go ahead. In this case, we're just converting everything to a double or a string. But go ahead and give it a try and convert some of these additional fields that didn't get converted.
And the typecasting is pretty straightforward.
It really is. Definitely. So again, very easy exercise on my part. Again, I like success.
I'll just use a fly now.
Sweet. All right, easy.
All right, was humidity our last one?
No, but it's okay. I think we got the hang of it. Everyone's really smart here. But let's do something a little more interesting and look at that forecast data. So if we do a struct, just like we did, you can see that there are lists within the struct. Pretty straightforward. And very conveniently, MATLAB even tells us what to do. So, we either convert it with a string, double, or sub. And so just like before, we can convert it and subtract. And of course, we had our current time. That's dates and times are represented in many different ways. And in MATLAB, date time, similar to Python date time, I suppose, that's the way to go in MATLAB. So it's just more conversions to the appropriate type and a visual, since we talked a bit about visualizations in the last session.
Big, beautiful plot.
Absolutely.
And this is another feature of the live editor, is that you can have your outputs either right below the code or to the right or left.
Yeah, thank you. It's like maybe you accidentally hit one of those. We're like, what's happening? But yeah, I really like that feature of the notebook. So again, now it's in MATLAB, we want to just work with it as we would. So I like this. I changed this recently to use a sinusoidal fit because it's also something from the community. So, again, we're, really supportive and, we want to take advantage of all of the great work that people are already doing. So we can use this forecasting, and looks pretty good to me for now. But, it's, again, nice to be able to see the application and how we can proceed through. And ultimately, we want to be able to, I created this whole example because we wanted to create an air quality web interface calling both MATLAB and Python from JavaScript. Oh yeah, I forgot JavaScript on the list. Next time. So anyways, we want to be able to kind of wrap up all these things that we just did into one function, and then we're going to call that from Python next. So the rest, go ahead, sorry.
No, I just Look at all that, and just look at it. I'm happy.
Yeah, it's beautiful in all its glory. So the rest of this, I think we can leave for an exercise for you. I like it. I think, I use this a lot for our industrial folks trying to get through their data processing in no time at all. But these are really intuitive. Let me go back to that. Intuitive, we call them live editor controls. I'm sorry, live editor tasks. So if you take a look, all of those sort of boring or, well, interesting yet annoying data prep steps like outliers, normalization, change points, like all these things that we need to think about. They're nice little apps basically that you can embed into your script, and then you can try it out. There's a lot of different ways to interpolate and to resample. So you can try them all and see what works for you. And so this is one of the things that, people really value about, you can bring in your Python, use your Python code and then bring it into MATLAB, mess around with these nice apps and live editor tasks. Maybe this next one is a better one to look at. Makes me feel more successful. There we go. And of course, let's do a quadratic. But again, I like to emphasize this just because, this is what a lot of people will do and just take advantage of these things quickly. The visualizations, the apps. It does make me sad because it took me 5 years to get my PhD with only one of the machine learning models in this app. And now you can train like 39 models with one click. But it's fine. It's fine. I'm not sad about it at all. But again, this is one of the big reasons that people really want to do this. So last step here, we're just going to look at this temperature model code, because this is again kind of the step-by-step process that we just took. So we're converting the data and then doing that sinusoidal fit. And now we can call it from Python.
Exciting.
So let's pause a moment and make sure everybody's enjoying themselves with the MATLAB code. And I'll go back to the slides here. Do we have any questions, Grace?
No, we look like we're good so far.
All right.
Hopefully everyone's making their way through the exercise, and you can keep files to play with afterwards. So play around with those live tests. Just
Excellent.
some things we want to highlight about what you just saw. Syntax differences. They're different languages, and you'll have to make sure that MATLAB knows when it's calling Python. So you want to start all of your Python calls with that py or pi. And instead of importing packages, you can just do py.package.function.
And by the way, too, if we call this over and over again, it's only going to import it once. So some people will ask that every once in a while. But yeah, that's the way to go. And then of course, data types.
Data types. We've included the documentation link for you guys to reference when you're trying to go through this on your own. But most of the time, or whenever possible, the data will automatically be converted, but there will be times where you have to convert it explicitly.
Yeah. Again, one of the biggest things that you need to think about when converting or working together with different languages.
Absolutely.
All right, let's switch gears.
All right, now we're going to call MATLAB from Python. And there are lots of different reasons why you might want to do this, very similar to when working the other way. Maybe you are already working in Python and you want to reuse existing MATLAB code, or you need functionality that's only available in MATLAB, or if you want to collaborate with MATLAB users, this is going to be useful workflow for you as well.
Yeah, especially, we see a lot of people, in the data science path, they'll enter industry, and there's so many MATLAB users across the board where, people working with hardware, people working with signal processing and lots of important applications like that, and automated driving. And so, suddenly it's like, whoa, there's all these people using MATLAB. I got to take advantage of this or get my code in the middle there. If, maybe you don't want to use it yourself, but you can take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
And even apps, you could also even open up the app. That's one of the things that people really appreciate, the signal processing. If you are are working with signals, you can use the 30 years or so of signal processing work that's been going into MATLAB. So yeah, anyway, good stuff. If you have any other ideas, please feel free to share.
We do have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Do we think Python could replace MATLAB? I think this might be a good question to address at the end of the workshop, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that question, Tina. But for now, Heather's going to show us what it looks like to call MATLAB from Python. Again, just because everyone's environment may be different, maybe you don't have Python or MATLAB. Heather's just going to show this.
Yeah, and the code is there. So if you go back, it's everything that I'm going to be showing here is available to you. So there's the notebook and the Python code that we had already shared. So definitely try this out on your own. But again, our MATLAB online environment kind of enabled us to all be on the same page and easily share. So we'll go ahead and go with that. Oh, this is the wrong file. Okay, it's okay. So I'm using Visual Studio. You can use whatever you want. Oops. And a lot of people ask, could I use Spider? Could I use Vim? Of course, nobody asked that. I like Vim though. So anyways, a lot of people really enjoy Visual Studio, of course, and it's really nice for debugging, even integrating multiple languages together. So we see a lot of that in this world. So one of the things, again, this is kind of why we're showing this as a demo, but there's an install process where there's a Python setup file that ships with MATLAB, and you just use that and run it. So we'll share this again. You can follow the documentation and get that set up, and then we just import the MATLAB engine. So this enables you to talk to MATLAB, and then you can just start the engine. Sorry. One of the things is, if I do it like this, it's just starting behind the scenes. So it's just going to run a MATLAB process, but you also have the ability to call the entire desktop. Again, a lot of people will like that, working with the apps, working with the data, kind of similar to Excel, clicking around. So you can always get the whole desktop if you want. And then we kind of go through the same process. That's why we also decided to do this as a demo, because, it's really similar to what we already just learned. Where now we can just go ahead about our business and call, we called this M, we'll just call m.square root, and this is now calling the MATLAB square root function. And since I like errors, again, kind of reinforcing that notion that different defaults and different languages, you're gonna have to think about that. But again, fortunately, it tells me right away it's a MATLAB error and it's a type error. So, again, just go back to our, make sure we're passing in a float. Cool, no big deal. The other thing is the difference between the way multiple outputs are handled. So in those cases, you need to specify number of arguments out. So as long as you have more than 1 or 0. So for example, this returns 2 output arguments, it'll return it in the same data type, and then or in the same variable, and you can just index.
Awesome.
All right. So another example here, if you have no output arguments, say you have a visualization, narg out equals 0. Again, I had a really hard time picking my favorite, but this is a nice little Easter egg, and it's the manager of MATLAB Maths, the development manager of all math. It's his former dog, RIP, in a sparse matrix.
I love
cool. It. So notice that it actually, brings up a proper MATLAB plot. So again, this is kind of motivating to a lot of people that want to take advantage of those visualizations and kind of clicking around and maneuvering. All right, but so now let's try to integrate our actual code that we wrote. So first we'll import the weather information. I should have cleared that out. And again, same thing that we just did. And now we can use our temperature model. So I'm just gonna share here. This is what we wrote, and we just call it like we did a square root, and it works. Voila.
Beautiful.
And so I skipped this because I wanted to finish my thought there. But this is one of those times where, you know, especially with that kind of signal data, you know, we want to probably clean it up. We could put it into the MATLAB workspace and then open up our apps and, you know, maneuver around that way. And again, I like to always have this here because that's one of the most common things that people want to do, really take advantage of that. All right, do we have any questions?
Looks like we're good so far.
All right,
Feel
so
free to pop in the chat.
excellent. So let's go ahead and just recap quickly. So again, we didn't spend a ton of time here because we, you know, we showed a lot and we talked a lot about the process. So just keeping in mind, you know, that syntax difference. And then also if you're using an operator, you need to be able to use the full functional name. And data types.
Always data types.
Always data types. But, you know, this is, again, we'll share all this and, you know, something to always think about, you know, what, you know, whenever you're going back and forth. And so we'll kind of leave this as an exercise probably. But of course, you know, if we wanted to continue on to that final app, you know, we can actually deploy everything all together. I think we did it. I think we nailed it. What do you say, Grace?
Yeah, we covered a lot today. In the slides that we'll be sharing out with you guys, there will be an additional slide that has documentation links on how you can go through all of these workflows that we talked about today. So if you're working on it on your own or with a colleague, you'll have some additional resources to go through that.
Excellent. And thank you guys very much. Thank you all. This is wonderful. Hopefully we had some nice successes. We had some good questions and lots of people sharing in the chat. So I thought it was a success on my part. I'm very happy. Hopefully everyone learned some stuff.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I really appreciate how you make it easy for everyone to follow around with the code during the workshop. That was really cool. I think that everyone can feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and we can start with that you mentioned before, Grace. Do you think Python would ever replace MATLAB?
I think that's a great question. I guess, Grace, do you want to start? I mean, for me, I don't think so, just because of the different needs and different things, sort of that integrated, like the IDE with all those little exciting things that make it easy to explore. And also the body of work is, you know, again, when I was talking about the math team, you know, we have very sophisticated linear algebra folks that know a lot. And you know, the formal, I guess the formal body of work that has already been done out there, I think at that point, you know, it's not gonna die. Grace, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to put it. Also, I think there are strengths to both the languages, and there are a lot of differences about them that just don't make them comparable. I think, you know, open source has a lot of magical properties, and there are lots of great libraries that exist in Python. And I think we also have our own, you know, open source community of things that integrate with MATLAB. I think it's a lot of it comes down to preference, and MATLAB also has a lot of different applications. Like you said, it's such a large body of work from so many people. So I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, and I don't think that one could ever totally take over the other.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. Yeah, and I think actually, given that discussion, you know, we tend to see MATLAB code on cars and planes and very serious applications. And so it's very, very well tested. And so that's one of the things that is really valued in the community as well. The fact that, you know, we spend a lot of time and effort on testing and making sure these things are going to work perfectly, you know. So yeah, great one.
Today we spoke about MATLAB in terms of data science, but it also has a lot of non-data science applications like Heather was mentioning. So we have a lot of questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to address. Okay. Will we have access to the recording? Is a question, Julia, that I think you can answer.
Yes, we'll be sending out the recording a week from today, or just about sometime next week.
Fantastic. And that'll come with the slide deck. how can I integrate MATLAB in Python the other way around? So yeah, you can call MATLAB from Python. We had a couple slides about it. I apologize, we did go through it a little quickly, but yes, you can, and there will be, the slides will be here that we send out, and there will be a documentation link as well for how you can get started with that. Do you see MATLAB
Perfect.
leveraging cloud, Heather?
Oh, yes, definitely. In a lot of different ways too. And I think that's one of the things that people, again, will value, especially integrating these things. You can, well, we've used a cloud version of MATLAB already, but we have the reference architectures all through GitHub to integrate in whatever platform you like in the cloud.
Perfect. I think someone else was asking, is MATLAB faster in terms of linear algebra?
It should be. If not, let me know, and I will get back to that. I will get to that performance team.
Yeah, math's our whole thing.
That brings up another question I had, which is, if you haven't written any code yet, do you think there are still circumstances where you'd want to write part in Python and part in MATLAB and still integrate the two?
Yeah, sure. Especially kind of that getting started. You have some idea of, like, I mentioned scikit-learn or, PyTorch or something like that. You don't have to write code in MATLAB necessarily. You can always just literally click on a file, explore, do all those things in the apps if you want, and then generate the code. So I think, it's actually a great way to get started, especially if you already have a model or some, data science stuff in mind that you want to use in Python. You don't necessarily have to start from scratch. You can kind of use a little of both.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it gives so much more flexibility when you're able to integrate multiple things like that. Which brings me to the next question, which is, can you integrate MATLAB with other languages at this point other than Python?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a good doc link. I think it's in the slides, but it has the the list of all the different languages, and including Fortran. There's a little bit of code. I think it's on GitHub now for the R integration. So that's in progress too. So pretty much whatever language you want, you can integrate.
Amazing. And with all those languages and the different potential to integrate with them, what are the biggest debugging challenges that come up?
Definitely. That's a great question. Definitely, we see a lot with the data type kind of challenges, and a lot of it is real decision making ahead of time, especially whenever we're exploring as data scientists, we're all kind of hacking around as we go. But this is where you really require some planning and thinking ahead. So really, that's kind of the biggest thing, is how to pass, when you're passing in data, getting it back out. And then, using the actual tools, each interface will have its own debugging platform or tools. So you can take advantage of either of those in whatever language you're in. And that's a part of the reason I like to use Visual Studio, because they're really natural debugging capabilities and in whatever language you want.
And I also, just to add on to that, is, we showed some of the Python errors, and I personally think Python errors are very nice, but sometimes when you're using different languages, it can be hard to parse the error messages when they've gone through both languages.
Right.
Definitely, that makes sense. I mean, it's nice that you can see which language the error comes from and everything. That's usually helpful. Another question in the chat, someone's wondering if MATLAB's able to measure the performance with regards to architecture, such as cache and memory. So the memory usage, questions like that. Yeah,
there's lots of different ways that you could do that, from within MATLAB, and even sort of monitoring from outside. I guess we could probably share some links to some of that, but yeah, there's lots of different ways to kind of work with it, depending on what you need, I guess.
Okay, perfect. And I guess just as a last question right now, this obviously seems like a really exciting area where kind of there's a lot of great functionality with MATLAB. What kind of things are you currently working on at MATLAB that could expand even further? What are the new things on the horizon?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things for me is, since I work a lot in AI and data science, a lot of the model explainability or sort of transparency people were really thinking about that. We talked about quickly some of the apps for, neural network, deep network designer and experiment manager. And we're increasingly seeing people that don't just want to take a PyTorch model and blindly go about their business. They need to understand, interpret, and be able to document, share. So that's really one of the things that we're, of course, in addition to all the math and all of the latest and greatest in this world, just making it more accessible for people and more interpretable and more intuitive is the big area of focus.
Yeah, and
Amazing.
for me,
Yeah.
some
Yeah, go
things
for it.
that I've seen recently, we're increasing, specific to this workshop, I suppose, actually, we're increasing how easy it is to go from PyTorch or TensorFlow into MATLAB and vice versa, and also increasing cloud access slowly but surely.
Perfect. That sounds very helpful. Thank you both for a great workshop.